Hey, all you beautiful Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what the heck's wrong with you? It's free. Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we are at such a crazy inflection point in our industry where the next 10 years, like I always say, can be so much different than the last 10 years, but it's going to take us showing up different. And so for those of us who show up here every week, this is the place to be to really kind of feed your mind and get a little bit better, change some frameworks, put some new ideas into practice, because compliance at the end of the day, ethics at the end of the day is really a performance, and it's your canvas to paint on. So we're talking about the COSO Demystified today, mastering COSO's internal control framework. Our entire job is there's regulations and we have policies. Those policies are obligations. We have to have controls around those obligations to make sure that those obligations are being met. So whether you're a COSO nerd or you don't even know what it stands for, you are gonna love today's episode. So let's get a massive emoji explosion as I run through a couple of announcements. Each week we give out thousands and thousands of credits. So free credits for CCB, free credits for SHRM, and free credits for HRCI. We got a really great buzz on LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you absolutely should be there. But I just want to share this. The one and only Wendy Badger, one of my all-time faves, she said in response to somebody looking for some credits who just kind of passed their CCEP certification, she said, Ethicsverse webinars put on by Ethico. The webinars are weekly. The host is amazing. Oh, no, I added that in. Sometimes more than once a week. Usually they last an hour and they're free. They're generally pre-approved events for CEUs that satisfy CCEP requirements. And then Annette, the one and only, said she recently passed the CCEP exam and primarily used Ethico's weekly masterclass webinars to accumulate her CEUs. So this is the place to be for that. So we want to continue to feed our mind. Readers are leaders. If we're not learning, we're dying. And so we continue to, our ears are also always open for new topics. We had a recent 2 weeks ago, last week, we had Matt Kelly on, and that entire conversation was from a response from one of you Ethicuties. So if you have great ideas of topics you want us to cover, please drop those in the chat. Please send those over, and we will work those in. I wanted to also share here a quick glimpse of our new UI. I keep talking about it because I'm just so obsessed with it. And I also wanted to share some feedback that we recently got from a client. So you heard it here first, okay? So we got rated recently by G2. This is not a pay-to-play site. This is like Yelp or Angie's List for software. Best ethics and compliance software out there. So if you don't feel like what I'm about to read about your ethics and compliance software, then you should probably take a look and see what else is out there. Remember, it's incumbent on you to grab the steering wheel of your life, grab the steering wheel of your career, exhibit some agency, and make sure that you have the right resources and tools in place to make the vision that you have for your culture of integrity a reality. Amrita and Angela's energy and passion for Ethico really stood out. Super helpful and enjoyed the demo. Both Amrita and Angela were very engaging, helpful, and great listeners. I especially liked the presentation and the Ethico system. It seemed a lot easier to use than what we are used to dealing with on a daily basis. And the solution seems to have what we need built right into the system. It made me feel that if we went with the system, our investigations would be better tracked, reported, and even easier to read. The Ethico system looks user-friendly. Back to that UI, okay, and less complicated, which I think is important. It also seemed much easier to filter out what we need as a team, therefore making curated reports easier and more at our fingertips, so we can draw out more ideas, solutions to see the trends and the patterns, since the OneTrust tool is pretty standard. I was unsure what goes on behind the scenes with the helpline, but seeing that was great, and getting to see how issues are handled made me feel great. How do you like that? Okay, I'm framing that. So if you don't know what's out there, if you haven't checked out Ethico, if you want to hear what all the buzz is about, now is the time to do it. As we're getting toward the end of the year, we have some great specials in place. Our new risk assessment tool has just come out. I thought I pushed this already. Our new risk assessment tool has just come out. We got a 50% off for all you Ethicuties through the end of the quarter. So end of the quarter is coming up here. So book your demo and we'll carry that thing forward. And then we've also released this DOJ defense package. So many of us are trying to drive a culture or trying to drive a program that is actually effective, where we're not kind of playing catch up all the time and not basing it on these lagging indicators, but rather getting better information at our fingertips so we can make better bets with the resources that we have. The DOJ defense package gives you all that in one spot. It has world's best hotline, okay, 92% thumbs up rate from people calling in who are usually pretty upset, 92% if you can believe it. Empathetic based hotline, okay, person to person. Case management that's going to help you close your cases twice as fast. We have a disclosure tool built directly in there to handle all your conflicts, all your attestations, things like that. Remediation, remediation controls kind of built in, right? So you can put those remediation plans and prove the effectiveness that issues are being handled consistently. And then, of course, risk assessments and that world famous dashboard reporting. So I'll share this slide kind of throughout the presentation if you're interested to see kind of what the different components are. And we got 25% off on that because we love you. You know I love giving away books. I don't even like making money around here. So which book should we give away? I'm going to give away the one and only Mary Shirley's book today. So Mary Shirley's book, she is the goddess of compliance in my mind. She will be speaking at the SCCE event, which I'll be talking about here in a second. She wrote this great book, Level Up. Of course, look, if you win one of the 5 books that we give away every single week, you can pick any from the Ethico library. And if you haven't checked that out, you definitely should. Here is a QR code for that. See all those great books on there. All those books should be on your, book, nightstand in your brain. Okay, so we're going to be giving away 5 of those. And Mary Shirley's book is really great. Any page you can turn to, there's 65 different sort of tips on how you can improve your program. Really actionable things that you don't need a bag full of money to do. It's just kind of engaging, like I said, in some different ways. So we're giving away 5 of those. And we want to give a quick little plug for SCCE. If you guys are coming to SCCE, you absolutely, or to the CEI conference, swing by booth 200. It's the no pitch zone, coolest book. Probably going to be the coolest booth at the whole conference, okay? Booth 200, no pitch zone. We're going to have a couch. We're going to be doing interviews like we always do. We're going to have a bunch of prizes. We're giving away hundreds of books and hoodies for those people that we really like. And for all of you, whether I like you or not, you're welcome to come to our cocktail party on Sunday night. This is not going to be like a ring of fire kind of pitch zone. This is going to be an actual party. We're going to have cocktails. We're going to have some bites. And I guarantee no awkward conversations, okay? So it's right there in the Gaylord. You don't even have to leave the facility. All right, with that, let's get a massive emoji explosion for my amazing guest today. We're going to be talking about the COSO framework. We got the one and only Doug Heilman, who is one of my favorite Ethicuties. He's always in the chat dropping gems. How's it going, Doug?
Great.
We got Johnny Frank, and if you can see Johnny's picture here, this guy can bench about 375. How's it going, Johnny?
Great. Love the photo.
And we got Annie. So let's get a massive emoji explosion as we dive into this COSO conversation. So I want to start off by talking about what is COSO, who are they, and what do they do? Let's start with you, Johnny.
Yeah, sure. So COSO is a private organization, and it's pretty old, but COSO stands for Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, COSO, right? And it's the IIA, AICPA, and a bunch of others that have created various frameworks, the most famous of which is something called the Integrated Internal Control Framework. People associate with auditors. I got to tell you, it is terrific for compliance people and a real lifesaver, as we'll talk about it today.
What would you add to that, Annie?
I'd say in addition to what Johnny just mentioned, there's a few other frameworks as well. So I think what we'll focus the most on today is the internal controls. And I think, how that can be the most relevant for compliance professionals, but there's a few other frameworks as well. There's, frameworks for risk management, fraud deterrence, sustainability, a few other areas there as well.
So you said this is going to be like a lifeline for compliance folks. Did you think that outline that I had in terms of like these these policies or these regulations and these obligations and then the controls, and our job is to monitor those controls, is that kind of the right framework? And how does, we're going to be diving deeper into this obviously today, but how does that model work in your mind? And where do you see some of those gaps in the application of a compliance program?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is me talking. So one of the things about the COSO framework is that it's typically associated with risk. It's also associated with opportunity. So, one thing that I really want to press upon is using the COSO framework is you could help your companies not just identify and mitigate compliance risks, but you can also use it, as we'll talk, to identify, mitigate operational risks, and also to identify opportunities. So all that stuff that comes flying by, it's a principal framework of how do I deal with all these things. So the CEO calls you up, say, what's going on with tariffs? I don't know anything about tariffs. Well, let me think about COSO, and I'll give you a framework, Nick, to kind of digest all that. That's what I love about it.
It's kind of a principle-based framework that can be applied to anything, exactly. To make sure that we don't have sort of unmitigated risks or things that are going to kind of slip through the cracks.
I
Go ahead, Doug.
describe COSO as the most important organization nobody's ever heard of. Because it's really kind of a confederation, if you will, of other organizations that all are of like mind to develop principle-based frameworks. It includes the AICPA, which we all know, Financial Executives International, all the CFOs, the people with money, Institute of Internal Auditors, Institute of Management Accountants, I'm probably forgetting one, the internal accountants. And if you've ever been to a homeowners association meeting or a condo board meeting, getting people to achieve consensus on anything is difficult. Imagine getting all those groups to achieve consensus on something that's principles based. It's a pretty massive effort. It's pretty important. There are a range of frameworks and standards, and COSO does publish some other guidance documents, which we'll get to in a bit. But a lot of it isn't like an ISO standard checklist kind of stuff. The good news, bad news about COSO is because it's principles based, it can be tailored to your organization, public, private, large, small, local, global. So the good news is it can be tailored. The bad news is you have to tailor it and do the work. It's not a crutch. It's not a checklist. It's a principles-based framework. And all the organizations I mentioned use it in some way, shape, or form to run their groups, to check on their groups. And if you're not in any of those groups, COSO can be kind of a mystery, which is why we're here today to introduce it and demystify what COSO is about and how you can use it.
You know, I love demystifying stuff. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add one other thing that folks on the call might not realize. If you work if you're at a public company, and particularly a company that has Sarbanes financial type reporting requirements, your company is already using COSO. And another reason for it to be demystified is it just in terms of talking to your audit group and talking to the finance group, because they're very familiar with COSO. They might not realize it's COSO, right? But they are using COSO to do all that. It also helps just in terms of that intra-company communication.
So, you know, a lot of people think this is just kind of associated with auditors. Can we talk a little bit about the history of it and why people think that?
Sure. Annie, do you want to take a swing at it? Or you want me?
I think the reason that it gets so closely associated with auditors is that, as Johnny mentioned, it's a lot to do with financial reporting and internal controls around financial reporting. So I think that's, you know, obviously the most associated with Sarbanes-Oxley and the audit work around that. But to take a step back, and I think one of the things that Doug mentioned is that it really can be applied to any aspect of your organization, any level, any area, any risk area. So although it's sort of associated with auditors from the beginning and maybe how it started with Sarbanes-Oxley and financial reporting controls, I think what we'll sort of dive into today is that it really can be applied to, you know, anything. Auditors may be aware of it, but I'm sure everyone on the call is already doing things that are in alignment with COSO in terms of internal controls, and you might just not know it yet. So really just trying to, as we've said, demystify it and have everyone be aware of it, not just auditors and financial reporting folks.
So this might be a stupid question, but buckle up, it's still early. So you're going to get a lot of those from me today. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to draft on what Annie said, I think the arc of the COSO internal controls integrated framework is instructive to the compliance community on what is compliance and what becomes compliance. The COSO internal controls integrated framework was developed back in the 90s as a voluntary framework for internal controls. After the meltdown that produced Sarbanes-Oxley, the statute required companies to have internal controls over financial reporting. And the process for that were subject to audit and part of the audit opinion. The statute did not say what internal controls look like. Everybody looked around and said, well, what does it look like? There was this COSO thing. So it has become de facto statutory for financial reporting. Now, there are some other standards and frameworks that have become sort of de facto compliance, like the OECD due diligence guidelines across countries. the greenhouse gas protocol in terms of calculating carbon emissions. So to me, it's kind of instructive that some of these things that appear to be voluntary, once they're widely adopted, they can sneak up on you and become compliance. The other thing about that arc in the financial reporting is that kind of swallowed up the internal controls framework, if you will, and people forgot that it could be used for anything, which is why a couple of years ago, COSO sponsored the effort to release guidance on mapping that topic neutral, agnostic internal controls framework to sustainability reporting. I'm an author of that document. It's free. It's available on my website and on the COSO website, and it provides practical guidance with lots of examples around, because there are people who talk the language of internal controls. Johnny and Nick, to your point, all the auditors, people, that's their language. But the people who are doing things in operations and real estate and procurement and environmental and safety, they don't talk the language of controls. But if you learn the language of COSO, you can have better internal communications and you can drive your company to better performance and reduced risk.
I don't think that we realize that we got some real COSO royalty here. So I feel like genuflecting. We should see some more emojis. I got I think you made a really important point. That this kind of a framework is so kind of universally applicable to the different departments and the different things that different folks in our organization are dealing with. And it's an extremely flexible framework, which, we're going to be diving deeper into this here in a second. But I just have a kind of a dumb question, perhaps, but be kind, please. How does COSO, how does it compare to these other frameworks that are out there or these other standards that are out there? What's similar and what's different?
So on the compliance side, everything that's in COSO, for example, would be in the DOJ evaluation of corporate compliance criteria. Okay, it's not written that way. It's not focused on compliance, but it's going to have the same sort of, you have to have a culture of integrity. You have to have risk assessment. You have to be able to respond to the risk, et cetera. It's just that. So it's as discussed over and over again, it's more principles based, right? And the whole concept of internal control, and it's funny because there's controls, and then there's this phrase internal control, and they're not the same thing. Internal control refers to what is the company doing to achieve its objectives, right? And a risk is something that prevents them from achieving their objectives. And controls is one of the things that you do to mitigate achieving those objectives. It gets very circular, but that's how I would describe it compared to these other frameworks.
And Nick, I would compare it to two. Off the bat, a lot of people are familiar with ISO. They have a whole family of standards. All of them cost money and are subject to licensing agreements. I've done a pretty thorough comparison of COSO to the ISO 14001 Environmental Management Systems standards and framework. They're close. They direct to a lot of the same things. One gap between ISO and COSO is that COSO considers the prevention and detection of fraud, whereas ISO does not. Things like segregation of duties and monitoring, COSO's a little stronger on that. In this community, that's pretty important. In the climate space, a lot of what's going on right now globally through the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, here in California, where I'm based, is all derived from what was originally the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. There are four pillars of that: governance, strategy, risk, metrics, and targets. If you look at COSO, there's a place for all of that. To say governance is where it all starts. That's the control environment. We have the cube to show here in a little bit. And, in compliance and ethics and hotlines, who's responsible for what? What are the roles and responsibilities of people? It's right there in COSO. And once you start looking at COSO, you might see some pieces of it that maybe you weren't thinking about before. It's a good idea to tuck that into the program we're developing, improving, managing, what have you.
Annie, anything to add there?
I think they both covered it pretty well, but I think just to build off of what they've said a little bit, COSO is obviously more controls focused, and something I mentioned earlier is that I think a lot of folks have controls in their day-to-day that they might not even consider controls. They might just see them as processes or policies or documentation, but COSO really focuses on the control aspect while building on the fraud aspect as well. So I think we'll dive into it a little bit more in the cube, but I think compared to the ECCP, it's a little bit more prescriptive or more standardized than the ECCP, but I think Doug did a good job of mentioning all the comparisons to ISO.
All right,
as a way of demonstrating when I teach COSO, as a way of demonstrating the flexibility of it, what we'll have folks do, and I encourage everyone to do it after you learn about it, is apply it to your everyday life, meaning apply COSO to, I have to make a career decision as to whether I'm going to leave my job, right? It's a way of learning COSO and its flexibility, that it's a framework, as opposed to the ECCP, which is very much, you must have this, this, and this. Sorry about that.
So is it worth giving a quick example of that, how you might apply it, or do you want to do that a little later?
We could do it later. It'll be fine.
Okay.
We'll do it throughout. Okay.
All right. So let's kind of start with this. Here's the cube. Here's the COSO cube. So why don't you kind of describe the cube, how it works, what we should be kind of seeing and learning from this graphic?
Yeah, sure. Is it on the screen? I don't see it yet, but.
Oh, I thought it was.
I think it's up there. I can kick us off.
Just go from your memory if you can. Just kidding. Go ahead, Annie.
Oh, I know from my memory. Go ahead, Annie.
Johnny's got this memorized. I can start it off, and then Johnny and Doug, feel free to jump in. So as you can see on the screen, the COSO cube is a visual representation of sort of this framework that we've been talking about. So it's three-dimensional. On the top, hopefully everyone can see it, but it says there's three bars across the top: operations, reporting, and compliance. And so those are the objectives of the framework. And there's reporting objectives, which are both financial and non-financial. There's operational, which is really related to operational efficiency, profit, running the business at the end of the day. And then there's compliance objectives as well, adhering to laws and regulations and making sure that you're in compliance with whoever you're required to be. The front side of it is the 5 components of the framework. And so running down the list, you start off with control environment, which is really, tone from the top, management's commitment to integrity and ethics, moving into risk assessment, which is, just what it sounds like, assessing your risks at whatever level you're working at. Control activities are what we've really been talking about as the internal controls. So any policies, procedures, segregation of duties, all of those things that are really happening on a day-to-day basis. And then information and communication is making sure that the right information gets out to the right people, that flow of information throughout the company. We've already talked about a few different times, this COSO language really helps you in the intra-company communication. You're kind of all speaking the same language. So making sure the right information goes out to the right folks. And then monitoring activities is, doing those periodic checks. Maybe it's an internal audit, external audit, making sure that the controls and all the processes that you have in place are operating as you intend them to, after you first implemented them. So that's sort of the heart of COSO. And then the piece on the right is the different organizational levels. So there's entity level, the whole entire organization, division, operating unit, function. So you can really take COSO and apply this framework to any level of the company. It doesn't have to be a whole organization overhaul. You could, start with one function or one area and really build it out from there. So I'll let Johnny.
Annie, I'd like to provide 2 examples for our Ethicuties here. If you imagine 2 very simple examples. One, if you have a factory in-house, you have all the employees, you control everything. Well, there's your operations. You have company policies and procedures and reporting internally and so forth. Now imagine if you have a vendor. We spend a lot of time on third-party risk management, a key supplier. Well, a lot of the reasons you use a vendor and a supplier is because you don't want to do that. It's not your core competency. And people get puzzled, well, how do we control things that we don't control? That was the whole point. We don't want to control it. Well, There are controls. Again, here's an example of learning the language, that a due diligence as part of vendor intake is a control. Periodic monitoring, whether it's a checklist or an on-site audit or monitor news services for compliance, that's monitoring. So whether it's in-house or outside, you can apply it different ways. Like you said, those little slabs behind Annie that you referred to. And then you can also apply this in a one-off and in a dynamic situation. If you're doing an acquisition, if you're doing a spinoff, okay, so now compare what our control network looks like to what we want, and compare it to a group we've acquired, and how do you integrate them so that we're one company? Or do we leave it different because they're in a different business? So this is just a reminder and a framework on how you make sure you don't leave anything out.
Yeah, and if I could just spend a few moments on the top row, I'll get on my soapbox, because it is the top row is critical, and it tends to get forgotten because people tend to focus on the front slide. So that top row is, you always have to put the word objectives after compliance, after reporting, after opportunities. Earlier versions of COSO used to refer to this, by the way, as financial reporting, and they realized, if you think about, like Doug and I, we were the monitors of Volkswagen. That was all about non-financial reporting,
Right.
about emissions, things like that, right? So that's point one. So what you're doing there is, what is the company's objectives, okay? The other thing that's critical for this call, though, is to add value and for compliance folks to be less lonely, if you will, right? Is to be, when they're doing work, is to be thinking not just about the compliance objectives, but also the operational objectives and also the reporting objectives. So take something like a hot topic like tariffs, right? Obviously, my objective is, as a company, is to comply with tariff laws and regulations. But I also have the operational objective of making as much money as I can. And I have the reporting objective of correctly reporting the information that is related to the tariffs. So they call this the integrated framework because all of these components are being integrated. But if there's like one major takeaway or begging that I'll give for today is, even though, we're focused, all of us, we start with compliance, is to be thinking about that word objective, right? Not just, right? And then with the objective to be thinking not just compliance, but also operations, because you'll be adding that much more value.
I think that's an important point. This is something that we've been talking about a lot on the Ethicsverse recently. The kind of fastest way to the grown folks table, like if you feel like you're at the kiddie table or you feel like you're never invited in, is to not only be able to speak like an adult, but to be able to, pull your chair into that conversation. And I think the easiest way to do that is to make sure that what you're bringing to that conversation is sort of fulsome and able to kind of connect to the broader objectives of the different stakeholder groups in the organization, again, up and down the sort of stakeholder stack, right? Like, what are the objectives in our, annual report, or what is the CEO talking about? What is what are the CFO's kind of OKRs for the year? Or like, what are the main objectives of these various departments? Compliance and ethics is a very unique department in every organization that I've ever kind of come in contact with, because it really can sort of be that circulatory system, and it can sort of credibly connect to those objectives. And a framework like this really forces us to make sure that our kind of compliance, objectives don't sort of supersede or don't fail to consider the objectives of reporting or the organization or just the operations in general.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple good questions come in the chat, and Johnny, I'm going to toss one to you, and then I'll pick up on one.
Great.
Somebody brought up the notion looking for examples, and I think a good example is a code of conduct. Well, the folks on the call may be responsible for drafting or implementing it. So a company code of conduct, how is that COSO? Where is this on the cube? Are there aspects of it where it triggers other things that we should be doing? How would you overlay code of conduct to what we're looking at now?
Yeah, so that would squarely be on the front side, in the control environment, which is all about governance and a culture of integrity. And when we get to risk assessment, right, if you have a strong culture of integrity, you could probably get rid of a lot of controls, hard controls, that the risk is covered, if you will, is adequately covered by the control environment. So that's where the code of conduct would specifically come in with respect to the COSO framework.
And so, for example, one of the things in writing the sustainability guidance, we came across many times that COSO is porous. You know, nothing is ever in like one particular slab or slice. Code of conduct, I think, is a great example. And if I consider a government entity where gifts and entertainment is very strictly limited, okay, so does the control environment need to emphasize that? Or do you get in other companies, maybe it's a little more higher level, and you put the meat on the bones down in policy and procedure and control activities? What is appropriate to your organization for how much detail, how much distribution, how much monitoring and auditing of gifts and entertainment? Because they're going to be different in different sectors. And that kind of goes into one of the other questions. One of the commenters said they look to ISO 31000 as a companion document to what we're looking at. And Johnny, we discussed before the call that in COSO, there's really a family of guidance and standards. Today, we're focusing on the internal controls framework, but we saw with Enron, we had a very good code of conduct, very good controls. They just controlled the wrong stuff, you know. So the enterprise risk management framework is another key deliverable, if you will, guidance published by COSO. And the enterprise risk management framework started out with a similar cube, and now there's a little different graphic to it. How do you understand what the risks are to your organization? How do you decide what risks to really focus on? And then once you identify the key risks or the risks that are worth your attention, then how do you implement controls to operate your organization within that risk appetite? So the 31000 standard is really more a corollary, if you will, to the enterprise risk management framework. The internal controls framework is how do you control what controls do you design and implement in your organization?
Yes, and for the folks in this call, my personal impression of the enterprise risk framework is it's risk to the whole enterprise. You know, what might take the enterprise out, if you will, existential sort of risks. And, you know, the challenge with compliance is, yeah, there are some situations that it's the death penalty, right? But for the most part, they don't make it to the top of the enterprise risks, if you will, or it's just one compliance is by itself an enterprise risk, right? As opposed to the nitty gritty schemes and scenarios that we'll be talking about.
Can you explain that a little bit more? I don't think I tracked that.
Yeah, sure. So when I think of, you know, it's funny, when they first came out with the enterprise risk management framework, basically they took COSO, they took this COSO, they added another line for strategy, and then they just flipped it, meaning they put control environment, they called it, I think, internal environment, and they put it on the bottom. But it was really very, very, very similar, right? But when people do enterprise risk, they're looking for, you know, the huge risk that's going to affect the whole enterprise, as opposed to things that are very significant, but it's not going to take the enterprise out. And with respect to the word risk, can we just talk for a moment about what a risk is? Okay, a risk is an event that impedes an objective. Okay, it's a very specific event. So, for example, from my perspective, it's not very, very helpful calling tariff a risk or Foreign Corrupt Practices Act a risk, because that's just a general statute, right? The risk is that somebody is going to overpay an agent, and with those funds, the agent is then going to pay a bribe to a government official. It's the actual event, right? So what I was saying before is the difference between the internal control framework and the enterprise risk framework. They're very, very similar. It's just the impact, right? They both have a significant impact, but paying a single bribe is not going to take out the organization. That's how I differentiate the two. Okay.
There's a great question from Eric here. Would training be considered a control activity or an information/communication?
It's both. When you read the COSO framework, they'll oftentimes will put it in training as part of information communication. All of these things, as Doug said, they're really very flexible. When you get into the world of auditors, they distinguish between, when we're talking about controls, entity level controls and transaction level controls. Okay, so general training on the code of conduct, the control environment of a culture of integrity is considered an entity level control, right? If I'm very specifically training you on the rules around the FCPA, that would be a control activity. So a control activity, by the way, is more than controls. A control activity is policies, processes, and controls. So your training activity would be technically a control activity around, let's say, FCPA. Does that make sense or no?
It does. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think training also, it goes to show, as Johnny said, this is porous. The providing training would be a control activity in my view. But when you design that, well, what is the objective of the training? Is it for compliance? Is it to reduce the risk? Is it to help launch a new product or service, to make your sales team, get on the right thing? So the risk assessment is when you design the training program, what are the objectives and how do you align the training efforts, both the content and the delivery, to meet your objectives? Then you do the control activities, you provide the information, you communicate the results. And then if you roll something out and if you have a 60% conformance and you were supposed to get 100, but you got to monitor that, you can also in the tail end do testing to see what was the uptake for it. If you rolled out training program to, improve safety or improve timely, reduce sexual harassment. So once you put training out for that, monitor your hotline calls to say, well, is the incidence of reporting of sexual harassment going up or down since we did the program? So if it went up, what does that mean? That people are now aware of it? Does it mean what's going on? So you can monitor that to see, is the training still fulfilling the objectives that you had for the training, and start at the top for control trickle that you can modify it accordingly. It's all linked.
I think that's to jump off one thing.
Go ahead, Annie. Yeah.
Sorry. To jump off one thing that Doug just said, and I think it's important to remember with COSO, is that it's not sort of a one and done process. You don't, quote unquote, implement COSO at one point and you're good to go. It's really an iterative process. So to Doug's point, if you implement the training, say you get the passing rates or the completion rates back at the end of it, and it's not where you want it to be, it's an iterative process. Maybe you update the training, update communication about it, continue to monitor, and it really is just builds upon itself. So, I know the initial question was, where does training fall on the front face of the cube, but it really sort of touches every aspect of it. So that's one thing to remember, is that, as you implement COSO or discuss COSO or learn the language, it really, it's an ongoing process, and you sort of get closer and closer to where you want to be. But as the business changes, as objectives change, you're going to have to pivot and sort of update as you go. So
I'd like to quickly kind of run through the top, the side, and the front sections. I want to just kind of let's kind of consolidate what we've talked about. And then I want to get into, in the last 20 minutes here, really kind of talk about some applications of this, because there's a great question in the chat where, which I'll come back to in a second. Where can somebody get started? A lot of this is maybe resonating, or someone's looking for sort of, a framework to kind of get the trains moving a little bit more on time or whatever. So let's, maybe I'll kick it off. We talked about the top section, right? And we have reporting objectives, operational or operations objectives, and compliance objectives. And this can be a great reminder for us to, like, as compliance folks, to add reporting and operations when doing a compliance review. Let's talk about the side and the front of the cube as well. So, Doug, give us a little kind of consolidation on the side of the cube, please.
Do you want to take a run at that, Johnny?
Yeah, sure. The side is really it's the one that's hardest to see, but basically it's giving you the flexibility of where in the organization do you want to apply the principles, right? So, is it an entity level review? We talk about enterprise risk management, right? Or are you going to be focusing on the business segment, or you can be focused on a specific section? So it's basically telling you it runs up and down the organization and how you want to do it. A lot of the real action is in the front side of the cube. So let me just kind of run through that. Right? The control environment is corporate governance. It is culture. It is roles and responsibilities. It is just really the culture, top, tone of the top, et cetera, okay? Risk assessment, as I said before, and this is where I just want to go a little bit slowly. A risk is an event. Somebody referenced risk appetite before, and in this world, risk appetite is probability. If you take a matrix, right, you have on one side of it, on X or Y, you'd have the probability and you'd have the impact. And your risk appetite is what level of probability and what level of impact am I willing to withstand, okay? So it might be, for example, reasonable likelihood of a significant impact. Anything worse than that, I'm unwilling to accept it, okay? When you do your risk assessment, whether it be in terms of the COSO approach, right? Whether it be the compliance risk assessment, operational risk assessment, or whatever, you're starting off with that event and what's the inherent risk of that occurring? Is it within appetite? If it's within appetite, meaning your control environment is there and the level, and without any control activities, the level of likelihood and the level of impact is within appetite, you could stop. You don't have to worry about controls anymore. You don't have, so for example, we were talking about training before. You don't even have to bother with the training because I'm just not worried about that risk, that event manifesting itself. Right, Doug? And then when you get to, when you get to control activities, the risk response that COSO gives you, and by the way, where do you find all this stuff? COSO is dense 40-page reading. You got to buy it. There's a free COSO of the executive summary. You'll get most of this just from the executive summary. And it's just a question of Googling around and playing around with the COSO organization website, okay? But in any event, COSO gives you 4 choices for a risk response. They say accept it as is, you can avoid it, you can get insurance, meaning you can share it, or you can reduce it. For the world of compliance, it's typically in the world of reductions. So let's go back to FCPA, right? It's above my control appetite, my risk appetite. Well, I can say, screw it, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to business in China. That's accepting it is. It never works that way, right? We could avoid it. We're not going to do business in China. It doesn't work that way. You could try to get FCPA insurance. That's not going to, they had it for a while. That's not going to cut it. You have to reduce the risk. And that's typically where we are with control activities. The one that's blurry is this information and communication, okay? But in today's world, since like they wrote this in 1992, the big difference between 1992 and today is data and even now AI. So when I'm thinking of information and communication, yeah, there's training, but I'm really thinking of the data out there and the expectation of how can I use data to prevent, how can I use data to detect, et cetera, And then monitoring is another way. It's a nice way of putting testing and auditing. Doug, would you say that's a fair summary of the front?
Yeah, I would. And Nick, I'll go back to your question, original question on the slices, from front to back, with an example. If you think about just, let's imagine a integrated food products company that has agriculture, had food processing, distribution to retail groceries, and marketing. And somewhere back there, you have to have procedures for a product take back in the case of, salmonella or what have you. What you do for all the aspects of COSO is different depending upon your business. So it can be tailored. Your control activities for agriculture are going to be different from distribution. So
Right.
How do you make sure that you tailor it to be appropriate to the risk and to the requirements? The COSO, in terms of getting started, I'll get back to a couple references.
Well, that's a great
there.
example. Sorry. In that example, that's great because these are kind of different businesses within this sort of integrated, food, manufacturer, whatever you called it. But there is that sort of same diversity, even if it's sort of one business between these different departments, that the compliance team is responsible for managing the risks of, or mitigating the risks of, or doing a risk assessment across. And so a flexible framework like this is really going to help push us away from that sort of one size fits all approach, or the same kind of, the same lens for every single kind of department, and kind of forces you, to your point, I think, to think about the unique aspects of that business and see, well, what are these risks do we need to ignore? Which ones can we sort of share in? Which ones do we need to actually reduce in the sort of, it kind of connects sort of the minutia or the micro to that sort of macro view of the business, which is what we have to kind of balance between all the time.
Correct. And I'd like to get back to one of the questions. We keep talking about this as a principles-based framework. What we're looking at on the horizontal slabs are components of the framework. Within that, there are 17 principles. And within the 17 principles, there are, I want to say, 51 points of focus that get a little more granular on the things that you can consider. The executive framework has some of that. I'm a champion of the document that I helped to author, the internal controls over sustainability reporting. The objective of that was really to get people who know the language of COSO and controls to talk in common with the people who don't know the language of internal controls, where all of the data and information comes from to enable sustainability reporting. It comes from operations and procurement and people who don't talk this language. So we took a great care of providing a lot of examples and make it very approachable and readable. All the principles are listed there. All the points of focus are listed there. The document is free. It's intended to be very readable in little chunks if you need to, or just a reference. So I think that's a great entry point to the world of COSO internal controls. Another thing that you might do, there is the risk management document, and there's executive frameworks on the COSO website, as Johnny mentioned. We move in a world of GRC. We talk about that when I was in House of Big Four 20 some years ago. We talked about GRC, governance, risk compliance, governance, risk controls. And COSO, kind of as a little backstory here, COSO a couple of years ago say, well, we have the controls framework, we have the risk framework, we talk about GRC, something is missing. Why don't we do something on governance? Because if you ask people what governance is, it's kind of a squishy thing. They look kind of funny and they'll describe something, but they don't really land on it. So they don't know if we're doing governance or not. Why don't we publish something? Well, COSO earlier this year released an exposure draft on governance, and then withdrew it from comment. So it's not likely that'll go anywhere. Just kind of listening on the buzz and backstory on why they stopped. The other two prevailing documents, the control framework and the enterprise risk management, are really principles based. The governance exposure draft got into maybe a little bit in the weeds and started to look a little bit checklisty, and it was not consistent with the principles base that is kind of the COSO brand. So they pulled it, and I don't know what'll happen to it, but the exposure draft is out there, and it's available. Maybe they withdrew it from the website. There are hard copies around. I've got one, an electronic copy. If you want to know what governance is about, to really get a good detailed view on governance, it's kind of a slog of a read, but it's pretty thorough and it's pretty good. not enforceable, not standardized, but it's a pretty good resource.
Okay.
So, Nick, you had asked me
go
before
ahead.
about a non-business example of COSO, right?
Yeah,
so let
like
me
getting a
give
new
you-
job or something you mentioned.
Yeah. So we do it all the time, but we don't even realize it. So let me give you an example, okay? I'm from New York City, okay? I live in, let's say I have a house, it's 3 hours away. I have an appointment in New York City at 2:00 in the afternoon. We don't know what kind of an appointment it is yet, all right? I have to decide, well, am I going to drive to the city in the morning? Am I going to go the night before or whatever? And what one does subconsciously, right, is, well, what are all the events that could happen, right? I could get a flat tire. I could get a traffic, whatever. How important is it? Is it important enough that I'm going to go the night before to make sure that I am there because it's an appointment for a new job? Or, you know what? I'm just seeing a friend for lunch, so I could I'll accept the risk, right, of there being a. So it's that sort of thing. Or if it's, looking for a new job, I have my operational objectives, right, in terms of, my career. I want to make some, all the objectives I have in terms of looking for a job, right, and then you think about, well, what good things and what bad things can happen. The good things are something that we call an opportunity. The bad things are risks. And those are examples of how you kind of apply this COSO thinking outside the job, and then you can bring it inside the job. Just want to think that in.
Yeah, that's good. So I want to kind of do a case study. I want to kind of carry this forward, and I want to talk about some applications.
Sure.
If you guys are open to it, and if you're not, just pretend you are. Okay. So, Frank had a great question here. How would you suggest, or what is a good first step for someone who wants to consider using COSO without becoming overwhelmed? So maybe we can talk about, let's say you're stepping into a company that has an INO compliance program, in name only, okay? An in name only compliance program. You're kind of sort of starting from scratch, but you know this framework sort of inside and out. How would you be applying this framework in sort of launching the compliance program, let's say, which is going to have a ton of different components, but we're kind of starting with the blank canvas?
Yes. Doug, Annie, you want to start or me, whatever you like. Go ahead.
I can jump in. And I think one thing I know, in this example, it's sort of an in-name only program, but I think really taking a step back and seeing what is already in place, even if it doesn't seem like it's sort of a full complex compliance program, see what's already in place. There may already be, processes, procedures, documents, controls that are happening that are just not referred to that way or are not, documented that way. So really taking a step back and seeing what you already have, so you aren't necessarily, building from the ground up. And then, to take it a step further, really looking at, starting small and prioritizing, and then building upon what are the highest risks, the most important priorities for whatever, organization it is, or, if it's a specific risk that you're looking at, really starting small, prioritizing, and then building after that. I think it can be very overwhelming to think about it from an entity level perspective and sort of revamping the whole program from scratch. But if you sort of start with what you already have and then focus on the biggest risks and prioritize from there, I think those are some of the ways to be able to make some real, change and implement, but not get completely overwhelmed by the process.
Yeah, totally agree, Annie. And kind of, in my experience, that kind of stuff, it pays, to just get out in the weeds and talk to people, or, I always find what I call pockets of excellence, even if it's in name only. There are people doing stuff and working valiantly and trying to do the right things, and, doing sort of desktop-based things or informal meetings or doing walkabouts and, things that could really be leveraged. And God bless them, they are really trying, and they're just not getting the support or resources or visibility. So I kind of like a bottom up and a top down approach, both, and kind of meet in the middle. It's got to start with the governance and the control environment, because if the tone at the top is we really don't care, well, then you've got a campaign to do there to highlight the risk, to see what's going on and how is this affecting our financial performance and how will this affect our ability to achieve objectives. You really have to do this in some ways. And by the way, It's not going to be this massive, monumental, multi-million-dollar effort. Let's take it at a reasonable pace. Let's scale it and focus on the important things first. You have to make the case, and you have to talk the language of the suits in order to get the attention and the money from the suits. Do you realize you're operating an organization that has no controls over operations? That's going to be a problem with product recalls. So convey it in language that shows what's in it for them, and then just get to work.
So Doug, I agree with you, particularly on the last section of what's in it for them. And so my perspective is the business is, and the C-suite is your client, right? And there are basically three things that you could do for your clients. You could give them more power and prestige. You can make their life easier. You can make them more money. What's a loser from what you're, in terms of the way the hypothetical is posited, right? What I would not focus on is helping somebody stay out of jail, because that is, particularly in today's world, right? That's just not a winner of an argument. So what I would,
nobody's going to jail anymore. We're good.
Right. So if it's a for-profit company, then how could I help them make more money? Because that's kind of what
that's going to resonate.
Right. And what you could do as in the compliance world, we've done a lot of monitoring, and one of the ways that we've saved companies millions and millions of dollars, even though we're a government-imposed monitor, is we say, all right, what's your risk? So you take the risk, take any risk that's important to the company, and then ask the company, what controls do you have in place to mitigate that risk? And in our particular case, it was 17 risks, and they gave us 2,000 controls. And I said, well, you can't have 2,000 controls. I said, all right. And it was a negotiation. They finally came back with 200 controls. Okay. What we then said to them is, then what about the other 1,800 controls? And we made, in that particular case, we made compliance look like heroes because they understood risk. They understood what risk appetite was, what the controls activities was. So I'm trying to start very narrow is what I'm saying. It's like Doug's bottoms up, right? Of singling on a risk, or if it's the FCPA, right? I'm not helping you avoid bribing officials and you're going to get prosecuted for that. What I'm helping you avoid is stemming revenue leakage and stemming expenditure leakage, because if you could pay a bribe, you're also going to be losing money, right? So it's to kind of convert it, to try to think about the risks that are they're so important to the business. Like if all this non-smoking laws in the United States were eliminated tomorrow, people are not going to start lighting up. Well, maybe some places they will, but you know what I mean? They're not going to be lighting up in the office because, as opposed to, when smoking, I'm old enough when smoking laws first came up, right? It was a big fight, right? So my point is to try to, in terms of you asking me what would I do first, is to try to find things that I can help the company make more money, either because they could assume more risk, or I'm going to save them costs.
Nick, my closing comment here, because I'm looking at the clock, is don't be afraid of it. I'm an engineer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial professional. I'm a degreed engineer, and my MBA is in marketing. It's easy. On the last call I was on, people ask about the imposter syndrome. Well, don't feel like you're an imposter. It's like, going from wearing one outfit to work. When I worked in a chemical plant, it was overalls and a hard hat. When I got a job at corporate, it was a shirt and tie. The different outfit feels different, but when you show up and start doing the work sooner, you get it. So just begin to read the language, begin to use the language. You'll start to recognize it in documents. Oh, I see where that's coming from. Don't be afraid of it. Just jump in. You'll be fine.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you brought up this imposter syndrome thing, because imposter syndrome is not like an indication that you shouldn't be in that room or you shouldn't be doing that thing. It's just an indication that you're a human being, because everybody feels it. Okay. It kind of, there, at some level, there are no imposters because everyone's just kind of figuring it out. And your business is probably different than somebody else's business. It's probably different than the business that you just came from, even if it's in the same industry. And so all of that sort of newness, that's natural. And that, that imposter syndrome can really be used to our advantage, because there's nothing more dangerous in life than somebody who's quote unquote seen it all. Every scenario changes. The risk landscape is changing all the time. And my man, Scott here, had a great comment. He said, a well-designed compliance program doesn't need to adopt COSO, but understanding it and using its language and framing provides yet another way to communicate about the organization's risk and how the compliance program is addressing them. And back to Johnny's point, it should at least give us pause to rethink our persuasion path, depending on who our audience is. That, what you described in terms of talking to the suits about making more money and, reducing costs, that might resonate a lot more to your point than sort of keeping them out of jail, because they live in a world of risk. For somebody that's the CFO type who's really more risk averse, well, you might be talking about other things about, financial audit, risk of our financial audit, or really have more of a focus on cost or like risk avoidance. The point is, for us to do our jobs well, we need a lot of buy-in from people throughout the sort of stakeholder stack. We need the participation of stakeholders on the front lines, middle managers, and we need people on in the executive level as well. And it's on us to interact with them in a way and speak in a way that is going to help them see the world the way we see it. Because until they're able to do that, and until they're willing to participate in the way we need them to, we're gonna keep kind of spinning wheels. And so this is a great. I could kind of keep rambling on about this, but this is a really great framework. I feel like I learned a lot. You helped allay some of my imposter syndrome fears. Okay, by being so kind, so appreciate that.
And
it's a privilege to be part of this community, and I appreciate so much what Ethico does for this community every Thursday. It's just, I hope we've lived up to the standards to provide the quality of information, the links, the perspectives, the insight. What you do for the compliance and ethics community on a weekly basis is just phenomenal. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, thanks for saying that, but I feel like this is what we do. This is not just me talking or just you talking. The chat is going nuts. There's been so many connections that have been made as part of the Ethicsverse. And, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. A lot of us feel lonely in our jobs, like you said before. And this is our this is our point in the week where we can get together. We can feed our brain a little bit, remind ourselves that we're all kind of fighting the same battle. And, prevent ourselves from reinventing the wheel, which is inevitable to do if you're not reaching out and taking advantage of this community that we're all a part of. So love this emoji explosion here at the end. This is phenomenal. We're getting close to 4,000 emojis. That is a win for me. So that's a home run. Appreciate you all. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Johnny. And of course, Doug. Appreciate you guys joining. We'll send around these slides to all the Ethicsverse members, of course. This COSO framework, you can print out on a bumper sticker and put it in your car, or maybe turn it into one of those air fresheners to hang from your rear view mirror. You can see some great additional resources here for Stone Turn Thought Leadership, Doug Heilman Consulting, and the COSO homepage. So one more thank you to Johnny, to Doug, and to Annie. Let's get a real round of applause going. What do we say, huh? How do you like that? All right. We'll see you all at Compliance Week. We'll be back, of course, next Thursday. Or not Compliance Week, you know what I'm saying. CEI next week. Got a bunch of great sessions. Come by the booth. Come and have a couple cocktails, and we will see you next Thursday. Love you all.
Bye.